Imagine a country where money is so worthless, thieves don't even bother stealing it. A place where banknotes are thrown in the trash or woven into handbags and sold as souvenirs because the paper they are printed on is worth more than the currency itself. Imagine a nation sitting on top of the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than the United States, a land that should be, by every economic metric, the wealthiest nation in South America, if not the world. But today, that nation is starving. Its hospitals have no power, its pharmacies have no medicine, and nearly 8 million of its citizens have fled, creating a refugee crisis larger than that of war-torn Syria or Ukraine. This is not a post-apocalyptic movie. This is modern-day Venezuela. How does this happen? How does a country literally floating on liquid gold run out of food? For years, the headlines have told you simple stories. Some say it's purely the fault of socialism. Others blame American sanctions. But if you look deeper, past the political shouting matches, you find a story that is much more tragic and much more human. It is a story of greed, of a specific economic poison known as the Dutch disease, and of a single catastrophic decision to fire 18,000 experts that doomed a nation decades before the collapse even began. This is the timeline of the most spectacular economic suicide in modern history. This is the death of Venezuela. To understand the hell that is Caracas today, we have to go back to a time when it was heaven. In the 1950s and 60s, Venezuela wasn't just rich, it was obscenely rich. In 1950, it had the fourth highest GDP per capita in the world. Let that sink in. The average Venezuelan was earning more than the average citizen of West Germany, France, or Japan. While Europe was still rebuilding from the ashes of World War II, Venezuela was booming. They called it Saudi Venezuela. It was a magnet for immigrants. People from Italy, Spain, and Portugal were flocking to Caracas, not fleeing from it. The capital city was a futuristic metropolis of skyscrapers and highways. It was a cultural hub where the wealthy would fly to Miami just for a weekend of shopping. At one point, the Concorde, the supersonic jet for the global elite, had a direct flight from Paris to Caracas. The source of this magic was, of course, oil. In 1914, the Zumaque-1 oil well blew, and black gold rained down on the country. For the next 60 years, oil wasn't just an industry, it was the entire identity of the nation. It paid for the roads, the hospitals, the skyscrapers, and the tax-free lifestyle of the upper class. But underneath the glitter of the disco era, a cancer was growing, an economic cancer. Economists call it the Dutch disease. Here is how it works. When a country discovers a massive amount of natural resources, foreign money floods in to buy it. This makes the country's currency extremely strong. On paper, a strong currency sounds great. It means you can import Ferraris, Rolexes, and Scotch whiskey very cheaply. But for the local farmers and factory owners, it is a death sentence. Because the currency is so strong, it becomes impossible for Venezuelan farmers to export their coffee or cacao. It becomes cheaper to import corn from Iowa than to grow it in the Venezuelan plains. Slowly, silently, every other industry in Venezuela began to die. Agriculture withered. Manufacturing vanished. The country stopped making things. They just pumped oil, sold it, and used the cash to buy everything else from abroad. By the 1980s, Venezuela wasn't a diverse economy. It was an oil company masquerading as a country. And the problem with being an oil company is simple. You don't control the price of your product. In the 1980s and 90s, oil prices crashed. The party ended abruptly. The government, which had been spending money like a drunken sailor, suddenly had nothing. Poverty skyrocketed. The middle class, which had grown used to Miami shopping trips, found themselves struggling to buy groceries. The inequality was staggering. In the hills surrounding Caracas, millions lived in tin shacks, looking down at the gleaming skyscrapers they could not enter. They felt forgotten. They felt cheated. They were angry. And in 1992, a lieutenant colonel named Hugo Chavez tried to overthrow the government. He failed. He went to prison. But on live television, before being taken away, he said two words that changed history. Por ahora. For now. 6 years later, in 1998, he didn't need tanks. He won the election by a landslide. Hugo Chavez was charismatic. He was a showman. He spoke to the poor in a way no politician ever had. He promised to take the oil wealth, which had mostly flowed into the pockets of the elite and foreign corporations, and give it back to the people. And for a while, it looked like he was a genius. Luck was on his side. Just as Chavez took power, the price of oil began a historic climb, from roughly $10 a barrel in 1998 to over $140 a barrel in 2008. It was the greatest lottery win in history. Roughly $1 trillion flowed into Venezuela during Chavez's presidency. Chavez spent it all. He launched massive social programs. He built housing, free clinics, and subsidized food markets. He cut poverty in half. Literacy rates soared. For the poorest Venezuelans, he was a savior. He was the Messiah. But behind the scenes, he was dismantling the engine that paid for it all. He expropriated farmland, but the people he gave it to didn't know how to farm, and production collapsed. He nationalized steel and cement companies, and their output plummeted. But the fatal blow, the decision that arguably killed Venezuela, happened in 2002.
The heart of Venezuela was PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. Before Chavez, PDVSA was widely respected. It was run like a private corporation. It was efficient, technical, and meritocratic. It was one of the best-run oil companies in the world. The engineers and geologists there didn't care about politics. They cared about extracting crude oil efficiently. Chavez didn't like that. He wanted PDVSA to be a political tool. He wanted direct control over the cash flow to fund his revolution. In 2002, the management of PDVSA rebelled. They went on strike, protesting Chavez's interference. Chavez's response was brutal and theatrical. On live television, blowing a whistle like a referee, he fired the top executives by name. "You are fired. Get out," he screamed, to the applause of his supporters. But he didn't stop there. In the aftermath, Chavez fired over 18,000 employees of PDVSA. Think about that number, 18,000. These weren't janitors. These were the senior engineers, the geologists, the drilling experts, the managers with 30 years of experience. This was the institutional brain of the country's most important industry. He replaced them with political loyalists, people who wore the red shirts of the revolution but knew nothing about petroleum engineering. The results were not immediate, which is why nobody panicked at first.
Oil wells don't stop working the next day. But slowly, maintenance was skipped, safety protocols were ignored, investment in new exploration stopped. Accidents became common, refineries exploded, production began a long, slow decline. While the rest of the world was enjoying an oil boom, PDVSA was rotting from the inside. They were producing less oil at a higher cost with more accidents. But because oil prices were at record highs of $100 a barrel, the cash kept flowing. The cracks were covered with money. Venezuela was like a lottery winner who quits his job, burns his house down, and moves into a hotel, thinking the cash will last forever. Chavez died of cancer in 2013, a beloved hero to millions. He died at the absolute peak of the party, leaving the hangover to his successor, a former bus driver named Nicolás Maduro. And then the luck ran out.
In 2014, the global price of oil crashed. It dropped from $100 a barrel to under $50. For a normal country, this would be a recession. For Venezuela, it was an apocalypse. Remember, by this point, Venezuela produced nothing else. The farms were gone. The factories were nationalized and empty. They imported everything: food, medicine, toilet paper, car parts, and they paid for it all with oil money. Suddenly, the national credit card was declined. Ships carrying food stopped arriving at the ports. Shelves in supermarkets went bare. A rational government would have cut spending. They would have admitted that the party was over. But Maduro's government did what every failing regime in history has done. They printed money. They printed money to pay the soldiers to keep them loyal. They printed money to pay the civil servants. They printed money to fund the social programs that were no longer sustainable. This triggered the classic spiral of hyperinflation. Too much money chasing too few goods. Prices started to rise. The government tried to fix it by setting price controls. They passed laws saying a loaf of bread could only cost a few pennies. Basic economics tells us what happens next. If a baker has to buy flour for $1 but is forced by law to sell bread for 10 cents, he stops baking bread. Bakeries closed. Butchers closed. The shortages got worse. And then the currency, the bolivar, entered free fall. To understand the scale of this, imagine you have your life savings in the bank, say $100,000, enough to buy a house. You wake up on Monday, and due to inflation, that money can only buy a used car. By Wednesday, it can only buy a bicycle. By Friday, your life savings can't even buy a cup of coffee. That is not an exaggeration. That is exactly what happened. Inflation hit 1,000,000%. People stopped counting money. They started weighing it. Shopkeepers wouldn't look at the numbers on the bills. They would put the stack of cash on a scale. And then the hunger started. Hunger. It is a primal fear that most of us in the modern world have forgotten. But in Venezuela, it became the only thing that mattered. By 2016, a dark joke began to circulate on the streets of Caracas. They called it the Maduro diet. But it wasn't funny. It was a statistical horror. A university study found that in a single year, the average Venezuelan living in poverty lost 11 kilograms, about 24 pounds, simply because they could not find enough food to eat. We are talking about a country with more arable land than France, a country that used to export coffee and beef. Now people were chasing garbage trucks. There's footage from this time that burns into your memory.
Crowds of people, former teachers, mechanics, office workers, swarming a trash truck outside a supermarket, digging through rotting waste to find a bruised fruit or a scrap of meat. The government's solution was the clap box, a subsidized box of food delivered to your door: pasta, rice, oil. But this wasn't just charity, it was a weapon. If you protested against the government, the box didn't arrive. If you didn't vote the right way, your children didn't eat. Food became the ultimate tool of political control. And while the people starved, the infrastructure began to die.
If you think hyperinflation is terrifying, imagine facing it in the dark. For years, experts warned that the electrical grid was collapsing due to lack of maintenance. The government blamed iguanas chewing on cables. They blamed American saboteurs. They blamed the weather. But in March 2019, the inevitable happened. The entire country went black. This wasn't a power outage for a few hours. It lasted for days. In some states, weeks. Caracas, a city of millions, plunged into medieval darkness. Without electricity, the water pumps stopped working. People had to drink from the polluted Guaire River, a sewer that runs through the city. But the true horror was in the hospitals. Imagine a neonatal ward. Premature babies rely on incubators to breathe and stay warm. When the power died, the incubators shut off. Doctors and nurses, weeping in the dark, tried to keep these infants alive by manually pumping air into their tiny lungs for hours on end. Many didn't make it. Surgeons performed operations by the light of their smartphones. Dialysis machines stopped, sentencing thousands of kidney patients to a slow death. This was the moment Venezuela ceased to be a functioning state. It became a survival zone. Crime exploded. Caracas became the murder capital of the world. Kidnapping became an industry. People stopped going out after dark. The vibrant nightlife of the Saudi Venezuela era was replaced by ghost streets ruled by gangs, often armed with military-grade weapons sold to them by corrupt soldiers.
So how do you survive in a country where the minimum wage drops to roughly $2 a month? You adapt, or you leave. Those who stayed witnessed one of the greatest ironies in economic history. To survive the collapse caused by a government that built its entire identity on hating American imperialism, the Venezuelan people turned to the only thing they could trust: the US dollar. The bolivar was dead. It was a zombie currency. The government kept printing it, but nobody wanted it. Unofficially, the economy dollarized. If you wanted to pay a taxi driver, you used dollars. If you wanted to buy eggs, you used Zelle or cryptocurrency. This created a bizarre split reality, a tale of two countries. For the 95% of the population without access to dollars, life is a daily struggle against starvation. But for the top 5%, the government officials, the military generals, and the boligarchs, the oligarchs connected to the regime, life is actually quite good. In the wealthy district of Las Mercedes in Caracas, you can now find a Ferrari dealership. You can find bodegones, luxury import stores stacked with Nutella, imported champagne, and 85-inch flat-screen TVs. This is the final stage of the collapse. It's not just poverty, it's a grotesque inequality. The people who destroyed the economy are the only ones rich enough to survive it. They dine in high-end restaurants protected by bodyguards, paying with stacks of $100 bills, while outside the window, a professor searches through the trash for dinner. For millions, the only choice was the exit door. The Venezuelan exodus is the largest displacement of people in the history of the Western Hemisphere, larger than the Syrian refugee crisis. Over 7 million people, roughly 1/4 of the entire population, have fled the country. They are known as Los Caminantes, the walkers. You see them on the highways of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Families walking thousands of miles on foot, mothers carrying babies, fathers carrying suitcases with their entire lives inside, wearing shoes with holes in the soles, shivering in the freezing temperatures of the Andes Mountains. They are not just the poor, they are the doctors, the engineers, the musicians. Venezuela has experienced a brain drain that will take a century to recover from. The people who could rebuild the country are now driving Ubers in Miami, delivering food in Madrid, or selling candy on the buses of Bogota. They left behind a country of old people and children, a hollowed-out shell of a nation. So, what is the lesson of Venezuela? It is easy to point fingers, to say socialism failed or sanctions killed it, but those are simple answers to a complex tragedy. The truth is, Venezuela didn't die because of a single ideology. It died because of a total institutional collapse. It died because they mistook resources for wealth. They thought that because they had oil in the ground, they were rich. But oil is not wealth. Wealth is the capacity to produce. Wealth is strong institutions. Wealth is an educated population and a government that serves them rather than stealing from them. Venezuela is the ultimate warning of the resource curse. It shows us that a nation can be blessed by nature, but cursed by its own leaders. When you destroy the checks and balances, when you fire the experts and replace them with loyalists, when you print money to cover up your lies, it doesn't matter how much oil you have. You will eventually run out of other people's money. Today, the oil is still there, billions of barrels of it, sitting beneath the soil. But the pumps are rusting, the wells are silent, and the people are gone. The richest country in South America didn't run out of money, it ran out of time. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe and let me know in the comments, do you think Venezuela can ever recover, or is the damage permanent? I'll see you in the next one.